This week on your Canada Day edition of The Right Side, the BC NDP comes to power, a movement for centrists in Alberta, Trudeau makes controversial statements about immigrants in Canada Day, and the federal government still has no plan to balance the budget. This is The Right Side, episode 23, recorded Saturday, July 1st, 2017, Confidence of Canada Day. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Right Side. We are back this week on Canada Day for episode 23 of The Right Side. Welcome back, Patrick.
Yeah, welcome to July. It's good to be here as always.
1st of July, 2017, Canada's 150th birthday. We do have a news story about this later on in the show, but of course, we're going to do what we do every week here at The Right Side and unpack the week's news and cut through some of that bias and sensationalism that you find in the mainstream media. And also take note of what's happened in BC this week. But I guess before we get going, I'll just remind everyone that show notes are at rightsidenews.ca if you want to follow along there, see what stories we've sourced and what we're going to be talking about. Rightsidenews.ca for show notes. So, what happened in BC this week?
Well, something happened in BC that hasn't happened in 134 years, and that was an opposition party replaced the governing party after a confidence vote. And so the headlines were, NDP asked to form next BC government after Liberal defeat. So basically, for anyone who's been following the show with us this time, basically the expected and inevitable happened. So the BC NDP will return to power at the legislature for the first time in 16 years after toppling Premier Christy Clark's Liberals on a vote of confidence Thursday, and after NDP leader John Horgan was summoned to Government House by Lieutenant Governor Judith Guichon and asked by the vice-regal representative to become the province's 36th premier. So said Guichon in a statement, as Lieutenant Governor, of British Columbia and as representative of Her Majesty the Queen of Canada, I've met with Premier Clark and will accept her resignation. I've asked Mr. Horgan to form government, he having assured me that he can form a government which will have the confidence of the Legislative Assembly. So Horgan's meeting with Guichon was brief and came after Clark spent more than an hour inside Government House, in which she later confirmed she asked Guichon for dissolution of the House and a new election. That advice was rejected by Guichon, who then called Horgan. She wanted to make sure in speaking to the Premier and to me that the continuity of government was going to be there and that the systems and structures we hold so dear here were going to be in good hands, Horgan said of his conversation with Guichon, and I assured her I would do my level best. There's an enormous amount of work to do. I look forward to working harder than I've ever worked before, said Horgan, who is Premier Designate until his official swearing in, which is probably in about 2 to 3 weeks. So, Christy Clark confirmed during her lengthy meeting with Guichon that she advised her to dissolve the House and call a new election, and Guichon rejected that advice to accept Clark's resignation. She made it very clear I only had 2 choices, Clark said. I did ask for dissolution. She hasn't granted that request. She has chosen another path. I suppose she'll be able to talk to you about why she made that decision. I don't know why, but she did, and I certainly accept the result. So before her government fell earlier on Thursday, Clark made one final speech as premier, in which she defended her throne speech that reversed or changed more than 24 policies that were not in their election campaign. And she took one final swipe at the NDP and the Greens for refusing to consider backing her government's reforms. She said, "It is now more obvious than ever that the opposition never had any intention to make this House work. Their only intention was to get the Greens on the dotted line and then tell us just to wait and see how they could contrive to bend the rules of our democracy so that they could hang on to power."
So is there going to be much bending after this? That is the question that needs to be asked about this. And also, one thing I think the media isn't necessarily giving Christy Clark full credit for is the fact that this was an hour and a half long meeting with the lieutenant governor, when most of these meetings are in and done under 20 minutes.
Yeah, and clearly she was, they talked about all different scenarios in this case, and the lieutenant governor clearly went one way, whereas Clark wanted to go another way. So who knows if who knows exactly what they talked about? We only have the statement from the lieutenant governor.
Right, and those conversations are very private and have been for hundreds of years. So we're never going to know exactly what was said in there.
Yeah, I mean, Clark can say what she wants, and the lieutenant governor can say what she wants, but we won't actually know. They're not televised.
They could have been having tea and crumpets for an hour and a half, for all we know.
They could have been. Who knows? Maybe Horgan had a very, very quick cup of tea when he went in. But I think what's coming after this is that it's very interesting that Horgan said that he would be able to. Let's see what the quote was. He can form a government and will have the confidence of the Legislative Assembly. Now, this is really interesting because he has 41 seats, the Greens have 3 seats, and the Liberals have 43 seats. So combined, the NDP and Greens form 44 to the 43. Now, they still have to elect a speaker, as Steve Thompson is expected to resign. I'm not sure if he's actually done that yet or not.
I think he did right after the confidence vote.
I think certainly when the House reconvenes and new government comes in, he'll definitely do that. And they'll have to elect a new speaker. So with the speaker not voting, it will basically be a tie on every single vote if the Liberals decide not to vote with the government. The proposed government, shall we say. So confidence of the House is still very much in question at this point as to how they're actually going to do it. But I think it was probably constitutionally correct of the lieutenant governor to give them a chance before we go to another election. After all, it's only been less than 2 months since the election. And it's hard to believe it's been that long already, but we're just figuring this out now.
It could take longer. I think Belgium took a year to work out their governing coalition last time they had an election. But, we talked about this on episode 20 and the whole role the speaker will play and whether or not that's going to throw away hundreds of years of precedent and see whether or not the speaker will just outright support the government in this case, or if they'll vote in the traditional speaker capacity. And if they do vote in the traditional speaker capacity, we'll have to see this NDP Green government look to the Liberals for support on some of their bills.
Yeah, and there is actually one particular precedent on this. Back, I believe it was 2003. It was definitely the early 2000s in New Brunswick, where the progressive conservative government of Bernard Lord was they had a 1-seat majority as well, and the speaker was a progressive conservative and ended up voting with the government quite frequently. In fact, that partnership actually lasted for 3 years until there were resignations, and he decided that he would have an election rather than try and get defeat based on by-elections. So we'll have to see how long this arrangement lasts, shall we say. Because there is precedent there for the speaker to be voting for the government. But if they're from the NDP or the Greens, they probably will certainly do that. And we'll have to see what happens, I guess.
Yeah, and I feel like there's more certainty now than there was last week, but we'll just have to wait and see how this all forms out. Who wants to be speaker? If anyone wants to be speaker, I think the NDP will probably offer one up. I think that's what they said, and they were going to get around the committee block, which would basically mean that the governing party wouldn't have a majority in the House when bills went to committee, and there are ways they can go around it. Some might see that as undemocratic, but they are on the record that saying they could go with a committee where the government has a majority on it. So we'll have to wait and see.
And as for Christy Clark, we don't know what she's going to do. Earlier, after the election, she said that if her government was defeated, she would become opposition leader and that she wouldn't be resigning. But who knows if what their party is going to decide to do on this as well. I mean, a lot of people have said that they'd probably vote for the Liberals wasn't the leader, but there's a lot of people that do actually still support her, and
and
I think there were some polls coming out that still support her. So who knows what would happen there?
And the poll that came out on Throne Speech Vote Day, Confidence Vote Day, Thursday, had the Liberals at 44 and the Greens the NDP at 38, and as we know, that would be majority territory. So there is still a lot of support for the Liberals out there. And if she does step down, that basically guarantees that this NDP government will last for probably 2 to 3 years, given the time it takes for a leadership race to happen.
Yeah, and it's quite clear from the election that their support comes mainly from outside of the lower mainland area and the Vancouver Island as well. And there's quite a bit of support in places like Kamloops or Kelowna, Prince George, and all of the other smaller communities that rely heavily on resources, and places like the Fort St. John area, Dawson Creek, where they rely on a lot of natural gas in that area, and even in the Northwest, where a lot of it is based on lumber and fishing, and a lot of trade routes with the territories. So a lot of that base probably isn't going to wither away really quickly. It's what's going to happen in the cities, I think, might be what depends on what happens next with the Liberals.
All right. Well, a little bit more certainty in BC. NDP government in waiting, a couple weeks till they're sworn in, and I guess we'll keep track of what's going on after that. So.
And we'll be able to stay up on what's happening there, and you will be able to find that rightsidenews.ca.
So moving on to
what's happening in Alberta.
Yeah, moving on to Alberta. Last weekend on June 24th, a group called Alberta Together had its inaugural meeting in Red Deer, Alberta, and this group has a goal of creating a centrist alternative in Alberta in time for the next election. They basically feel that both the NDP and the hypothetical United Conservative Party are both too polarizing, and there's lots of Albertans who would vote for a middle-of-the-road center option, which they're probably correct on that.
Mm-hmm.
The meeting yielded a result that Alberta Together will rally around the Alberta Party. The Alberta Party currently has one MLA, its leader, Greg Clark, in Calgary. And their goal is to create this sensible alternative, and they feel they can accomplish both fiscal sanity, I guess you could say, balanced budgets and the like, while maintaining services. Now, anyone who has followed Alberta before will know that this is exactly the same line that the Progressive Conservatives always sold in the past. So it's interesting to see this same kind of policy making a resurgence in Alberta, except under a different name. So, Alberta Together is headed by former Alberta PC Party President Catherine O'Neill. O'Neill ran in the 2015 election as a Progressive Conservative and was defeated by an NDP candidate in Edmonton. Alberta Together also is attracting individuals such as former Edmonton Mayor and Health Minister Stephen Mandel and former PC leadership candidate Stephen Kahn. No new political party will be created. This group ultimately does have a huge number of hurdles to overcome if they want to be competitive in the next election. First and foremost, they need to convince the Alberta Liberals and the card-carrying Alberta Liberal supporters to get on board. In a poll taken this past April, it was found that the Wild Rose were on the brink of forming a majority government on their own, while the PCs were in second with 29% support. The Alberta Party had 5% support, and the Alberta Liberals also had 5% support. So this group ultimately must first work with the Alberta Liberals to ensure that the centre vote won't be split in the 2019 election, and then they must figure out exactly how many of the progressive folks in the Progressive Conservative Party, or the former Progressive Conservative Party, are open to this idea. And it's also worth noting that the same poll back in April found that the NDP were in third at 24% support. 2019 is a long time away, and this group needs to start now if they want to see success in 2019, because I don't think personally that people who are aligned with the Alberta Liberals will move to the Alberta Party or come to some kind of agreement to support the Alberta Party, because, as we know, the Alberta Liberal Party does have links to the federal Liberal Party in Canada. Also, the media hasn't reported on Alberta Together that they have reported on the degree of the United Conservative Party, as they probably feel that targeting the United Conservative Party will allow them to cover any potential slip-ups or bozo eruptions, as Brian Jean has called them. And what the media is missing by not reporting on this is that after last Saturday, Greg Clark has actually said that the Alberta Party openly advocates for a provincial sales tax, which, when that was last polled, a good chunk of Albertans did not want to see the introduction of a provincial sales tax. So this is something that should have been talked about after the Alberta Together meeting last Saturday, and highlight what the Alberta Party stands for and what they feel is the most effective path back to fiscal balance, because they are entirely in their right to support a provincial sales tax. But the media not talking about that isn't really doing Albertans a favor who might be interested in this new centrist alternative.
Yeah, and I think just looking at the poll numbers there at 5% for the Alberta Party, it's actually quite a miracle that they were able to win just the one seat as it was. Clearly, they were just centered on that one riding, because in the last BC election, the Greens won 16% of the vote, and they only got 4 seats and there's only 3 major parties in BC as well, whereas it seems like there's probably 3 major parties in Alberta with 2 smaller ones along with it that are fairly significant. And I think something else, as you mentioned, that they're advocating for a PST, I would have to think that's probably political suicide in Alberta, is it not?
Yeah, and I mean, on that same note, I go back to the federal Conservative leadership race, and if you just look at the numbers, and the vast majority of people in that race supported Maxime Bernier with his libertarian message of low taxes and minimal government interaction, those same people are not going to support a provincial sales tax, which effectively would only make the Alberta Party competitive in Edmonton and Calgary, and maybe not even Calgary because of that, because the Wildrose and PCs are looking like they are going to own Calgary if an election was held today. So,
and they would certainly own the rural ridings as well.
Right, and the Alberta Party would be competing with the NDP in Edmonton. So, as you can see, it's a really tall order to get a group like this going, and I feel that there was a blueprint on the United Conservative side, or there is a blueprint for that because of the merger that happened in 2003 at the federal level, but the centrists haven't done anything like that anywhere in Canada. And how big of a deal would it be to see a Liberal Party merge into a different party, as in the Alberta Party? That's unlikely to happen because of the huge infrastructure that exists within that party and that they can bring in from the federal level. One just needs to look at Saskatchewan and see that the Saskatchewan Liberals are actually still around after the Saskatchewan Party was formed, which was a merger or a creation of a new party between the Saskatchewan Conservatives and the Saskatchewan Liberal Party. So I don't know if they're going to be able to pull this off, but that's where they first got to start if they want to be successful.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, the only Liberal Party that there is in Canada that isn't affiliated with the federal Liberals and basically isn't a centrist party itself is probably the BC Liberal Party, which, of course, we've just talked about. And they haven't been affiliated with them since the 70s. And basically, they were a support of progressive conservatives and traditional centrist liberals who are banding together to basically keep the NDP out of power. And of course, for the past 16 years, they were successful at that. So I think in that case, the NDP in BC had quite a bit more support than probably the NDP in Alberta do. But it took the amalgamation of the centrists and the conservatives to be able to force them out of power. Now, I think the Conservatives in Alberta, and certainly the Conservative parties in Alberta, have a lot more support than they did in BC. But given that it took the uniting both of those factions together, do you think there's really a clear path for there to be like three separate political alignments in Alberta?
I think it's ultimately.
I don't really know if there's room for
no.
them.
Alberta always tends to break down on rural versus urban. It still does, and I mean, just look at any of the last election results, and you'll see the massive differences. 2012, the cities were owned by the PCs, and the Wild Rose got rural. In 2015, the NDP got the cities, and there was a split rurally between the PCs and Wild Rose. So, I mean, that's why I say it's got to start from the center with the Alberta Liberal Party. And we'll see where.
Yeah, and I think even if you look back at the, and I think if you look back at the 2015 federal election too, there was a lot of rural-urban splits as well between the Conservative Party and the Liberals. I know we noticed that a lot in the West, for sure.
Yeah.
So I think Canada as a whole very much is very urban-rural split, and I think if a party is successful, they will be able to combine those two things to be good for both areas.
Indeed. All right, so let's talk a bit about Canada Day and what Justin Trudeau has to say on Canada Day, specifically in regards to new immigrants. The headline reads as follows: Justin Trudeau jealous of immigrants and families who chose Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that he is jealous of immigrants to Canada. His rationale is fine, and it's the following. Because I think being able to choose it rather than being Canadian by default is an amazing statement of attachment to Canada. He's not wrong, I don't think, right?
Yeah, I think that's fairly obvious,
Yeah. So this was in an interview that aired on CTV Morning News this past Friday. And in that same statement, he continued to say, I always sort of laugh when you see people who are, not many of them, but intolerant or who think, go back to your own country. No, he says, you chose this country. This is your country more than it is for others because we take it for granted. And this is where the story kind of takes a turn. This is absolutely crazy. Canada is no more a new immigrants country than it is a country for someone who has been here for many generations. This is the exact opposite of the very criticism that Trudeau made of the Conservatives in the 2015 election when the issue of, quote, old stock Canadians came up. Trudeau took issue with the term old stock Canadians and they're taking pride with having a lineage in Canada. Rather than old stock Canadians, this time Trudeau is championing new immigrants and giving them a higher value and a higher precedence than the rest of us who reside in Canada. If it's not appropriate to champion old stock Canadians and their proud lineage, it also shouldn't be appropriate to say that Canada belongs more to a new immigrant than to anyone else. The article also goes on to mention that hate crime targeting Muslims more than tripled during the period of 2012 to 2015. And while that's concerning, there's a hidden fact that the media didn't report in these hate crime numbers, and that's that the most targeted group of individuals in Canada of hate crimes are the Jewish population. And when further broken down by race, blacks, unfortunately, are the victims of the largest number of hate crimes. So there's two kind of issues with this story here. First one is, of course, saying that new immigrants have a higher attachment and a higher value to Canada than the rest of us, when that's the exact same thing as saying old stock Canadians have a higher attachment and value to Canada. If that's not right, Trudeau's statement also shouldn't be right. And I think you and I can speak for lots of people when we say that we do have the same attachment to Canada, and everyone should have that same attachment, correct?
Oh yeah, you go down to in bigger cities that have that don't have as quite a high of an immigrant population. They're still out there celebrating on Canada Day, just like everyone else, and a lot of people are very proud of their country. Even though they were born here and really didn't have a choice in which country they were born in, but they're very fortunate to have been born in a country as great as ours.
That's right.
And I think saying that an immigrant that chose the country is going to have a higher attachment, that may be true. It also may not be true. We don't really know. It comes down to the person. But to say that that it's more a country for the immigrants because people who are born here take it for granted, I think that's not true, because once again it comes down to the individual person. It's like making a generalization of a certain part of people. And if you were talking about for instance a race of people, then someone would say that's completely racist.
Can you imagine the outcry if this was put on for a race or for white people?
Or based on religion.
There you go.
I mean, there would be such an outcry, and it would be such a terribly wrong thing to say, but because it's immigrants versus people who are born here, it doesn't seem like there's as big of a deal about it, when really it should be a big deal.
Yeah. And I mean, this was, it was in this interview, there was no follow-up question to it. There was no questioning of it by the opposition. There was no discussion of it by media panels. It was just accepted that this is something the Prime Minister said, and therefore it must be true. And, I think the media is doing a great disservice to people, because it makes, if someone watches that interview, they'll see it and they'll feel that, oh, maybe I shouldn't be as proud of this country because I'm not a brand new immigrant, right?
Or there's probably a lot of people that think, hang on, wait a moment, this isn't right. I'm very proud of my country. I've lived here all my life. I have lots of family here. I go traveling. I go to see the Rocky Mountains, or I've got a cabin in in the Lake Country in Ontario. I have friends all across the country. There's a lot of things that Canadians can be proud of, and I think our democracy is certainly one thing. Our high degree of human rights, our economy, our culture,
our natural resources.
There's so much that there's so much that you can be proud of that you don't even. Yeah, you don't even have to be proud of one singular thing to be proud of Canada. I think the fact that he's making such huge generalizations about it boggles the mind.
Yeah. And also the reporting on hate crimes. Hate crimes are never good, but this was in a report released by Statistics Canada, and this increase in hate crimes targeting Muslims has been cherry-picked numerous times by the media, and I just thought we'd mention that here as an aside, because if you actually go to the tables, you'll see the actual data for this. And while we're talking about hate crimes against Muslims, we should be talking about hate crimes against all the groups.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, because a hate crime is a hate crime. It's not good no matter who it's against.
That's right.
All
right. So, what else has Trudeau been up to this week?
Well, he held a news conference the other day, and he was talking a bit about the economy and how the economy has been since he took power, and how his government has been spending things. So the headline that I think we both saw this and were quite perplexed was to see that Trudeau claims his government has met fiscal targets and Conservatives partly to blame for the deficit. The Prime Minister has said that his government's $23 billion deficit is at least in part because the Conservatives left an $18 billion hole in the budget. Trudeau said Tuesday that the Liberals spent about $10 billion in 2016 to 2017, which was their first full year in office, precisely as promised in the 2015 election platform. But he insisted the Liberals had to deal with a baseline budget deficit of $18 billion after they came to power, even though their Conservative predecessors had predicted a balanced budget.
Not only the Conservative predecessors, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, which at one point the Liberals praised, also predicted a surplus.
Yes, exactly. So Trudeau said, quote, we just went from a floor where the budget was balanced because supposedly the Conservatives had balanced the budget to what was the reality of our budget of being at about $18 billion in deficit at the end of that first year. The Tories, of course, have long disputed Liberal claims that they left the country in the red following their election defeat, which came partway through the 2015-2016 fiscal year. After the Liberals took over, Ottawa ended up posting a deficit of $1 billion for 2015 to 2016. The Harper government had projected a $1.4 billion surplus for that year. So Trudeau appeared to be referring to the 2016-2017 fiscal year, his government's first full year in office, and claiming that the Conservatives left an $18 billion deficit. The Tories blame the eventual shortfall on fresh spending by the Liberals. They point to a report last October by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, as we said, which said Ottawa was likely on track to run a surplus in 2015-2016 had it not been for new spending. So the Trudeau government has been criticized for a budgetary outlook that projects several years of deficits, including a shortfall of $23 billion for 2016 to 17. This year, the government is predicting a deficit of $28.5 billion, including a $3 billion accounting adjustment for risk.
That is a mind-bogglingly large number.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking as well, especially year to year. That's on top of. That's not in it. That's in addition to, not instead of course. So in 2 years, that's over $50 billion. When you think about it, that's quite a bit. So Trudeau made Tuesday that he's focused on making investments to lift the economy and vowed to remain fiscally responsible when it comes to spending. The Prime Minister refused once again, however, to say when the books would be balanced. He said, quote, "We made the decision in the last election that instead of focusing on balancing the books arbitrarily and at all costs, we would focus on the investments needed to grow the economy," he said, referring to the Liberal plan to run deficits in order to invest billions in areas like infrastructure. The Liberals won the election with a pledge to run annual shortfalls of no more than $10 billion over the first 3 years of their mandate and to eliminate the deficit by 2019-2020. The latest federal budget does not project when the deficit will be eliminated and forecasts shortfalls across its outlook, which only extends until 2021-22. And a federal report published on the Finance Department website in December predicted that, barring any policy changes, Ottawa could be on a path filled with annual deficits until at least 2050 to 51.
I remember that report, and that is the budgetary deficit side of it. Once you focus on the debt, it becomes a whole other picture, but of course we won't talk about that right now because we've talked about that in past episodes. It doesn't feel like there's any accountability here or, any confidence from the government side that this will be fixed at some point in the future. There needs to be a roadmap to encourage investment, because if people are seeing a continued amount of debt and deficit accumulating, that's going to affect credit ratings, that could affect interest rates, and that all three of those will actually affect the investment climate into Canada, which isn't good for anyone. So,
and it will affect the Canadian dollar as well, which
is already suffering.
And it also makes it known of how much money we have to pay back on things as well. Like they inversely affect each other. So if the Canadian dollar is bad, interest rates also go bad. And if the interest rates are bad, the Canadian dollar goes further. So the only way to fix it really is to kind of reverse course on this.
And as we talked about in the story, there's no real roadmap to doing that.
Yeah, they only go up to 2021, and they're putting deficits right until then. So, you could simplify it down to it basically being like a credit card. If you spend more money than you have, and you try and pay back what you have, and you don't pay back enough, you get charged interest. And that interest goes up the more you have, and the more amounts that you have to pay interest, your interest rate will go up as well, because it means that you aren't able to pay back, which means they need to find a way to get more money out of you. So the more debt you have, the higher interest rate is going to be, which means the more money you're going to be charged, and it means the less money that you'll have to spend on other things, such as infrastructure or anything else. So in a sense, they're basically mortgaging the future to pay for it now.
Yep. So, I mean, I would love to see more from the mainstream media in general, focusing in on how important it is to have a good fiscal outlook. Granted, our debt to GDP ratio isn't that bad. I will give the government that and give our country that for being able to produce that. But still, it's kind of the old adage that you want to be able to save for a rainy day. It's not a rainy day right now, but we want to be able to leverage that good debt to GDP ratio should it get a little bit rainy outside.
Yeah, and let's be honest, it's not raining, but we're definitely not in the sunny ways anymore. It's definitely cloudy outside.
There we go.
And who knows? Who knows if it's going to clear or if it's going to start raining.
All right. So what do you got for word of the week this week?
So our word of the week this week is confidence, and that comes after the confidence vote in BC and the NDP assuring the lieutenant governor that they have the confidence of the House. So in that sense, confidence can mean a lot of different things. And I think one that we could also talk about is confidence in the sense of having confidence in something, as in thinking that it's going to work, such as the Trudeau Liberals' insistence of confidence in their budget plans, or having confidence that he thinks that immigrants have more of an attachment to Canada than people who are born there, or the confidence that the centrists in Alberta have that they can form a legitimate movement. But I think mostly in politics what it refers to is the confidence of a legislative assembly or a parliament for a government to be able to continue governing. And in BC, I think we have a lot of uncertainty with that. I know I've used that word uncertainty quite a bit in BC before, but whether the BC NDP government is going to be able to have confidence in the House when they are going to have a 43-43 split with the tie being broken by the Speaker, it's going to be interesting to see if they're going to maintain that confidence.
Indeed. And, like you said, confidence in Alberta, of the Alberta Together movement, or in this case, the confidence that we will be able to balance the budget and provide a clear financial outlook for the country. That's another issue that sparks confidence in leadership. So I think confidence makes sense for our word of the week this week. Great choice on that.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
All
and
right.
I have confidence that if you want to find us, you will be able to find us at rightsidenews.ca. We're also on Twitter, Facebook at rightsideca. And if you want to subscribe to us via iTunes, you'll be confident to know that you can find us at rightsidenews.ca/iTunes, where you can have a list of the shows, and there's a list of show notes on the main site, and you'll be able to find everything you want to on that.
All right. Well, with that being said, we'll see you next week on July 8th, and thank you for sharing your time with us.
And happy Canada Day to everyone. No matter who you are, it is your country.